Okay. Um, we wanted to share the experience on our daughter's line break, central line break. It happened a few days ago, and we discovered while we were connecting her to the TPN. We noticed some brown spots in her central line dressing, uh, and we decided to inspect the dressing a little further by opening it up, and as soon as we peel it off the dressing, we noticed that fluid was leaking, and that's how we knew that there was a break.
So when we noticed that there was fluid leaking, tried to determine where the break in the line was, where the fluid was coming from, and we took our emergency clamps and we clamped the line just below the break point, which we found was right here, just beneath where the thick part of the line joins with the thin part of the line. I don't think you can see it here in the video, but it's right there in that area. So we clamped below that point to prevent anything from getting inside of her central line that may cause infection. We checked her a little more closely to see if she had any signs of infection. Looked around the central line area and saw that there was no redness or swelling or streaking, no pus. She didn't have a fever. She hadn't been acting abnormally. We didn't think she had an infection, but we did know that there was a risk for her getting infection with the break, so we needed to take her to the emergency room. So we moved pretty quickly to get things ready. We went and grabbed our emergency bag and made sure we had everything in there that we needed to take with us to be able to keep her feeds going. We took an extra bag of TPN in case they didn't have it there at the hospital, because they often don't have that ready when we get there. Made sure we had a few changes of clothing for her and for us, because we knew that we'd be there for a few days. We probably spent, 10-15 minutes getting ready, throwing everything together. And then we got in the car and we left. And we called the hospital before we left and let them know that we were on our way and the reason we were going, so that they would be prepared. Unfortunately, it was on a weekend.
It was on Sunday night.
Sunday night. Our daughter always gets sick on the weekend. And so when we got there, of course, none of the main doctors that we deal with were there. In fact, the only GI doctors or surgeons who were there were the residents, who are always less experienced and less knowledgeable than the normal doctors. And the attending physician also was there and talked to us at some point and made some decisions too. So when we first got there, we jumped to the front of the line at Children's Hospital. They've told us that because our daughter has a central line, we have priority. So there was only like one person in line, but we jumped to the front of the line, let them know that our daughter had a central line, and that well, that was it. So they took us into registration. We explained that she had a break in her line, and they actually made us wait around for a few minutes before they took us in, but they did let us register ahead of the others.
Okay, it wasn't that long. I mean,
No, it was
it
on
was
about
probably
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Then we went back into the triage area. The nurse asked us some questions about Camila, her medications that she's on, and just all the regular stuff that they ask you when you go to the emergency room. Then they took us back to one of the rooms, and the nurses came and they wanted to inspect the area, so we removed. Oh, I forgot to mention, before we left our house, We had a big sterile gauze pad. It was probably about 8 inches square, I would say, maybe 6 or 8 inches square, and we placed that over her dressing, just to, we wanted to keep something over it. Because it was the line was broken and we had the clamp on it. We couldn't just put the normal Tegaderm on top because it wasn't really sterile anymore in the first place, and also the scissors don't, or the clamp doesn't really fit very well. So we just had a large sterile gauze pad. We stuck that on top of everything just to kind of keep anything else from getting in there, and to keep everything in place. We wrapped that with an ace bandage, although our ace bandage wasn't really quite long enough, so we actually just ended up putting the onesie on top of her and used that to kind of hold everything in place as best as we could. So we took her straight to the van and put her in her car seat. Made sure that we had as little movement as possible to try to prevent anything from moving, prevent her line from getting pulled out, and strapped her in her seatbelt, so she was secured at that point. So when we got to the emergency room, the nurses wanted to inspect the area, so they lifted the bandage and took a look. And they said that they were going to have one of the doctors come in and take a look, and of course the doctor who came in was a resident. We asked him how many times. Well, he said that they were going to try to repair the line, and I asked how many times he had done a repair to a central line, and he said none. And we expressed our concern about that, and he said, well, that's okay, I'm going to come back with my senior resident. He's more experienced than I am. He's the most experienced resident here tonight. So he came back a few minutes later with his senior resident. The senior resident also said that they were going to try to repair the line, and I asked the senior resident how many times he had done a central line repair, and he also said none. So we again expressed our concern that the senior resident had never performed this procedure before, and we asked if there was another doctor who could, or anyone else with more experience. We had heard that one of the physician's assistants, who is very experienced and knowledgeable, has been with the Children's Hospital in the intestinal rehabilitation department for about 8 years. We've heard that she does a good job, so we asked if she was available, and they said no, but she would be there tomorrow. And we asked if it would be okay if we waited until the next day, Monday morning, to have someone else perform the procedure who had done it before. The residents were very understanding. The senior resident said that that was not a problem, that he would honor our decision. The attending physician, however, tried to pressure us into having it done right away. She made some comments that it was very important to have the line repaired because there's a high risk of infection. According to her statistics, there's a 100% greater, 100 times greater probability of an infection with the line exposed. She also expressed concerns that our daughter would become dehydrated without getting her TPN fluids, and some other similar types of reasoning. We explained that we weren't quite as concerned as she was. We understood the importance of having the central line repaired, but wanted it to be done by somebody who knew what they were doing because it is something that is so important. And we did feel that it would be okay to wait about another 12 hours until someone showed up who knew what they were doing. Because the line had been covered, the nurses actually, before the doctors came in, had, well, this was after we made our decision. So what they did, we told the doctor that we weren't concerned about dehydration because our daughter also receives enteral feeds through her G-tube. And
they were going to put up,
and they were going to give her a peripheral IV anyway to give her fluids. So that was really just an excuse that the doctor was trying to make to pressure us into letting the residents to perform the procedure. And the other reason about the infection, high risk for infection, we said, well, we understood the risk, and that was the reason why we wanted someone experienced to do it.
And we knew that the protocol was to put her on antibiotics anyway, just to rule out the infection.
And they started the antibiotics that night, even before the procedure was done. So there's another reason why we felt more okay with allowing her to go overnight without the procedure being done. So they honored our decision, and the nurses, what they did was they took some iodine. They cleaned the area around her central line pretty well. We asked them to also wipe down the clamp because that was not sterile and it was inside of her dressing. So they just cleaned everything with some iodine, and they put another Tegaderm on top of everything. It somewhat held the clamp in place and everything else. So they did a pretty good job of kind of dressing it up. We obviously had not attempted to do that before we left the house because our main concern was just getting her to the hospital, and we also don't have a lot of experience with.
Yeah, this was our first time we had a break, and I mean, this line has been there for 14 months. We have never had a problem. So, and one thing that I wanted to also say is that a few weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks before this happened, we started noticing, when we were doing dressing changes, we started noticing some dark spots in the line, like inside the line. Like we put flashlight, to see what it could be. It seemed like it was blood, like staying in some spots in the line. I mean, the line was flashing. And also we tried drawing out blood, and that worked pretty nicely. But we did notice a few times that there was like blood just staying in the line itself. And we brought it up to our doctor. We asked about it, if we could, if that meant anything, maybe clotting but she said as long as the line flushes, there is no concern of clots. But I think that was a sign that something was happening to the line. And anyway, just if you ever run into that, just, be on the lookout. And also, the reason why I want to share our experience is to warn people to not, always ask when you go to the ER if for somebody experienced that has dealt with repairing central lines. If they don't have any experience, do not let them touch that line because they can do more damage than good. And you don't want that to happen.
So what ended up happening is we stayed overnight. The dressing that the nurses had put on in the ER did a good job of doing what it needed to overnight, and the next, actually it wasn't in the morning, we discovered it wasn't quite as urgent as they had told us it was. Anyway, they didn't come immediately in the morning like they said they would. It was actually about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday when they finally rolled around to our room for the first time that day and performed the procedure.
The repair.
And it went pretty well. What they did is they actually cut the line where you can see it here, below where the break was, and they took that end of the line that was left, and they got a new line about similar to this with a cap on the top, and it was a little bit longer length, but the new line had a wire on the inside and a thicker tube around the thin tube, which was the new one, and they connected the two, and I guess used the wire to kind of guide the two pieces together, and then they slid the thicker tube down over the top as kind of a joint to hold the two together, and then they used a needle and filled the inside of that joint with some kind of adhesive, and that was it. And so that made a new line that we could use. The adhesive had to, well, we couldn't use the line for 8 hours. They needed time for the adhesive to, I guess, dry. And so after 8 hours, they flushed the line, and then they started trying to run some fluids through it, and found that everything worked okay. And that was it. So they kept us there
2 nights.
a little while longer, just to wait for the cultures on the blood and make sure the line was working okay and everything else. That was it. So
and they sent us home with antibiotics. I mean, with Vanco for a few days. They also did a urine culture. That was not fun. Yeah, so that's the protocol that they do at our hospital.
And we forgot to mention our suspicion of what the brown spots were that we saw under her dressing. We think that that was some of the dried blood that we had been seeing inside of her line before. That when the line broke, it was flushed out with the other fluids. I think that's what was causing those 2 brown spots that we were seeing underneath her dressing. And that was our experience. It wasn't really quite as bad as I had imagined it would be. Things went pretty well, and I think we were somewhat prepared. I know that I had always kind of run the scenario through my head so that I would be prepared in case it ever happened. So when we noticed it was there was a break in her line, we pretty quickly, without thinking, grabbed the clamp and clamped it and got ready to head to the emergency room. That's pretty much the main things you need to know. But the important thing is not to stress out and panic. And it went pretty well. And the good thing is that our daughter was always in good health through the whole situation. She never had an infection before we went up there, or during or after, so it went pretty well.
So anyway, hopefully this helps anybody out there that goes through this experience. Just make sure you get somebody experienced to repair the line, and don't get intimidated by doctors trying to push you to do what they to do things that you don't feel comfortable doing. So that's the bottom line, I think, right? Because we did feel the pressure, and if we weren't prepared, or we probably would have given in. I don't know. Anyway, that's all for today. If you have had an experience with repairing the line, share it with us. We would like to know and learn also. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.